this is Lady Boulay, and welcome back to Black American Lineage. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your comments and your thumbs up. Thank you for all you do to support this channel. Well, the election is over, and we are recovering one way or the other. The competition between Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris was intense, it was passionate, and it was well fought, I thought. But she came up on the losing end of the election. Many are disappointed, and so we have to learn to still live with the disappointment because life goes on regardless to whether your candidate won or lost. But today I want to talk a little bit about the history of Black Americans voting. A constitutional amendment had to be passed in order for Black men to be given the right to vote, because remember, they were coming out of slavery, so they were not considered citizens, so they couldn't vote. So the 13th Amendment ended slavery, the 14th Amendment gave them citizenship, and the 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote. Remember, in 1870, only men could vote, so Black men got the right to vote before white women. So the 15th Amendment, which sought to protect the voting rights of Black men after the Civil War, was adopted into the U.S. Constitution in 1870. Despite the amendment, within a few years, numerous discriminatory practices were used to prevent Black citizens from exercising their right to vote, especially in the South. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that legal barriers were outlawed at the state and local levels if they denied any Americans their right to vote under the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." Despite the amendment's passing, by the late 1870s, dozens of discriminatory practices were used to prevent Black citizens from exercising their right to vote. So see, we're talking about, well, I ain't gonna vote. I'm gonna vote the couch, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that. And yes, that is absolutely your right to do. But when you consider that the right to vote is an American right, and it is your right as an American citizen, it should be taken into account that this was something that was done specifically so Black people who had been enslaved could vote. And they took voting seriously. They took voting seriously. They took all of the rights that they were granted seriously, even as people tried to take those rights away from them. In 1867, following the American Civil War and the abolishment of slavery, the Republican-dominated United States Congress passed the first Reconstruction Act over the veto of President Andrew Johnson. The act divided the South into 5 military districts and outlined how new governments based on universal suffrage for men were to be established. Now, what this is saying is that the Congress had to override the president's veto. President Johnson was a racist, he was a Southerner, and he did not want to see Black people freed from slavery. So the Congress had to act over the president. That's how come we have the balance of power. So one person can't decide everything. The Congress of the United States divided the South into 5 military districts. They had to send federal troops into the South to protect the formerly enslaved people that they were now calling freedmen. But they had to protect them and also to protect their right to vote. Because if it was left up to the Southerners, those formerly enslaved people would not have any rights. Does that sound familiar today? With the adoption of the 15th Amendment in 1870, a politically mobilized black community joined with white allies in the southern states to elect the Republican Party to power, which brought about radical changes across the South. By late 1870, all the former Confederate states had been readmitted to the Union, and most were controlled by the Republican Party thanks to the support of black voters. So this is why black voters began as Republicans, because it was the Republican Party that ended slavery, gave them citizenship, and black men the right to vote. So we were among the first Republicans. In the same year, Hiram Rose Revels, a Republican from Natchez, Mississippi, became the first African American to sit in the United States Congress when he was elected to the United States Senate. Although black Republicans never obtained political office in proportion to their overwhelming electoral majority, Revels and a dozen other black men served in Congress during Reconstruction. More than 600 served in state legislatures, and many more held local offices. This is why there is such a fight to keep black people from voting during the Reconstruction era, which lasted from about 1865 till 1877. Black people had gained political power, economic power, and also they were building businesses and establishing a civilization even as they came out of slavery. So that is why there has been so much pushback against us in America. By the late 1870s, the Southern Republican Party vanished with the end of Reconstruction, and Southern state governments effectively nullified both the 14th Amendment, which was passed in 1868 and guaranteed citizenship and all of its privileges to black Americans, and the 15th Amendment, effectively stripping black citizens in the South of the right to vote. Because in 1877, there was the compromise, and the compromise was to pull the federal troops out of the South, which had been protecting black citizens from terrorist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. In the 1876 presidential election, there was a tie in the Electoral College. The Republican Rutherford B. Hayes had 269 votes, and the Democrat Samuel Tilden had 269 votes. As we know, it takes 270 votes to win the Electoral College and the presidency. So a compromise had to be made. The Democrats in the South, the Southern Democrats, wanted to re-enslave the black people to rebuild the South. The Republicans wanted the White House. They wanted the power. So they made a compromise. The Democrats said to the Republicans, if you will pull the federal troops out of the South, you can have the presidency. So the Republicans threw the black people under the bus, and they took the deal. So Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, became the president, and Samuel Tilden stepped aside, and the black people went back into slavery, which is what we call Jim Crow. So after the compromise and in the ensuing decades, a range of discriminatory practices, including poll taxes and literacy tests, along with Jim Crow laws, intimidation, threats, and outright violence, were used to prevent black men from exercising their right to vote. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Black men were given the right to vote in 1870. Women were given the right to vote in 1920. But black women in the South in particular were not able to exercise their right to vote for the same reason that black men were being prohibited from voting. Literacy tests, poll taxes, intimidation, threats, and violence against them kept many black people, especially in the South, away from the polls. It took the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to guarantee black people the right to vote, as well as all of these others around here, these other so-called marginalized groups. They weren't voting either. It can be very instructive for us to take a look at our history and to see where we have come from. Okay, thank you for listening. Leave a comment and have a good day.